veneer, it can be a sneaky one. It can bubble up, it can crack, and it's very easy to sand a hole through it. In today's project, I had a few different issues with veneer, so I'll show you what I did to solve it, and actually what I tried that didn't work, and in the end, what did work for me, at least as a little workaround. So let's have a look at today's desk makeover with some veneer challenges. This desk I got for about £30 or £40 quite a few years ago on Facebook. I intended at the time to give it some TLC, but it actually just became a desk that we used and part of normal life, and then once it was in place, it was kind of tricky to find a time when we didn't need to be using the desk to give it some love. It had some veneer bubbled up on the top, some damaged veneer down by the drawers, and the top was coming away from the drawers a little bit too. It was in reasonable condition, but just a few things that needed to be sorted out. This desk just about qualifies as a vintage, which is 20 years or older, which is wild to me because even though it's 2024, this desk came with one of those sliding shelves where you put your computer keyboard. How can that be something as a feature which is vintage? Where the frame for the drawers were slightly detached from the top, you could see that the screw was visible. It was a case of taking the top off, which was screwed on with many screws, and then securing those screws in tighter. You can see how the veneer has bubbled up on the edge of the drawer frames as well. One side was more damaged than the other, but I removed both so that they would be consistent in how they looked. I got this off eventually with a Stanley knife and then sanded it flat where the glue had been, which was a pretty quick process. So after several years of using this desk daily, it really did need a thorough clean before getting started. I used a TSP cleaner and gave it a good once over. I always feel like this step is a bit of a patience game because you have to clean it, you then have to rinse off the cleaner, and then you have to wait for it to dry before you can move on. So it's never the fun bit because you just want to keep cracking, but it is a vital step. I had some dark patches on the wood as well and mixed in a paste of Barkeeper's Friend to remove those as much as possible. And I'm really excited to be sharing today's video with my friend Danny from Our Humble Home. And we are both doing a furniture project today, and I would love you to hop over to watch her video after this one. Here's a quick intro from Danny.
Hi there, my name is Jenny. I'm from the Gold Coast, Australia, and my channel is Our Humble Home. And today I'm collaborating with Rachel and we're doing a furniture makeover. I really love her channel, I love her DIY projects, and I love her accent. It's so sweet. I'm working on a piece of furniture today that's a really outdated dresser. It's laminate and a flat pack type of thing. Turn it into something really pretty from something that's quite ugly. So I hope you guys will join me after Rachel's video and enjoy.
In hindsight, using a stripper probably would have done this job a bit more quickly. However, I went with a sander to try and get rid of the rough edges on the finish. I started with 180 grit sandpaper because I was nervous about not making a hole in the veneer, but it barely even touched the finish. So I then had to go back and start at an 80 grit sandpaper, which really knocked off the finish, and then work my way up through the different sandpaper levels until it was smooth to the touch. Not my favourite step, but we're going to get to the fun bit soon. The first challenge with the veneer was replacing the chipped veneer on the front of those drawer frames. I bought a replacement length of veneer to attach to them, which is a pretty simple process. I measured the width of the frame and then I cut a strip of the veneer to length to match it, making sure that the grain was going in the same direction. This veneer is so thin that you can cut it with some quality scissors. I used a little Stanley knife and a ruler just to make sure it had a crisp line. I also made it a fraction bigger than the space that I needed so I'd be able to sand it smooth, because once it's cut and it's too small, there's no going back from there. I didn't need to exactly match the colour of this additional veneer because I was going to be changing the colour of the desk anyway to give it a more warm and cosy feel. But even so, I would have been comparing veneer in its raw state compared to the finish on this desk, so it wouldn't have been a direct match anyway. Firstly, I applied some Gorilla Wood glue to the back of the veneer strip, and then you simply press it on and iron it in place on a medium setting. It really is that simple, just leave it to cool, and then if you need to sand the edges slightly smoother, you can do that then. So if you have something like a strip of veneer that you need to replace, this is a really easy way of doing it. So onto those bubbles on the top of the desk. So this was more of a challenge and one that did eventually defeat me. But I'm going to show you the process I did anyway, because this is what people had recommended to me. You can see those bubbles at the edge of where the veneer meets the edge of the table. First of all, I used my knife to scrape out as much of the dust that was in there as possible. It was quite a solid bubble. I then got an artist's syringe and filled it with some wood glue and squeezed it into the gaps and used some clamps to secure it in place and let it to dry. The aim being that you're squeezing some wood glue into the space where the bubble is and then reconnecting the veneer to the tabletop. I left it to dry, took off the clamp, and nothing had happened. And what did I do in the end to solve the problem? It's not so much solve as hide the problem. Because the back of this desktop looks identical to the front of the desktop, I simply swapped it around. So those bits with the bubbles are now at the back, which means they're less visible because they're hidden by things like monitors, and you're not going to see them anyway. On to giving this desk a bit more of a cozy colour. So in my head, I was looking for a warm, chocolatey, coffee kind of feel. I wanted it to have a bit of dimension and colour and interest. First of all, I taped off the edges where the veneer trim was going in a different direction and used a rotary tool to make sure that the painter's tape matched up with the line of the veneer as well. My plan was to do a paint wash. This isn't the end colour, this is a base step to give it an all over consistent base to add that dimension. So for this one I did a paint wash, which is mixing paint with water to give it a more translucent see-through look, which is ideal if you want to see some of that grain still. Now I didn't keep much of the grain, but that's because the darker it got the more I liked it, so I just went with that. How much paint and water you mix together really depends on the look that you're going for. If you want quite a see-through look, then you might want as little as about 10 to 20% of paint to your water. For this first coat I did some cobblestone, which is a beigey sort of grey. I did my first test on a drawer rather than the desktop because I wanted to be sure that I actually liked the colour and finish that we were going for before committing to the entire desktop. After doing the initial coat, I then wiped it back with a cloth. It almost seems counterproductive because you're wiping off some of the work that you've just put on, but paint washes are rarely going to be one colour, so you're always going to build up those layers anyway. And the more of the grain you can see after the first coat, the more dimension you're going to get. For the main colour of the desk, I used a paint called Coffee Bean, which is a classic brown. The thing with paint washes is that they don't look particularly beautiful until they're really in their final stages, so it's going to look worse before it gets better. But you kind of just have to trust that you will get there. And worst case scenario, if you don't like it, just change it. Because you're adding water into the paint, it's helpful to do some light sanding in between your coats as well, because the water is going to raise the grain. I used a smaller detailed brush for some of the edges, just to try and avoid getting paint on edges that were drying. You have just a bit more control with a smaller brush than using the same sized brush all over. You want to put your paint on and then smooth it out as quickly as you can so that it doesn't start to dry. Once I was happy with the tabletop, I then went back and did those edges that were going in a different direction. So I taped the brown edge so that the paint wouldn't get onto that surface area. I'm always a bit nervous about doing this in a fairly freshly painted top, but as long as you remove the tape quite quickly after you've done your coat of paint, it should be okay. I initially thought I was going to change the handles into something different. When it came to it, actually, I couldn't find any that were the right size and that seemed to fit the shape of this desktop. So I went with the original handles, which was silver and not really suited to my warm brown look anymore. I did a coat of slick stick to mattify them so that they would nicely take the paint, and then I painted with some bronze. I went with bronze because it's similar to brown, so it would tie in nicely, but also it's shiny, so it would give that a little bit more variation to the different colours. People question whether or not you need to seal chalk paint, but in such a heavy traffic area like this desk, this was really important. It always looks a little bit terrifying when you're applying sealer to a finished piece, as it looks like you've just added some PVA glue or white glue to it or something. As long as you don't leave any big blobs, then it will dry fine. I reattached those new shiny handles and then we were finished. This is exactly what I pictured when I wanted to make over this desk. It is warmer, it's got some depth, it's got some dimension. It looks so much fresher than the shabby state that the old desk had got to, and it's going to last a good long time. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you have stayed until now, hopefully you found this video helpful. Maybe you've got your own veneer project that you've delayed starting because you weren't really sure what to try. Hopefully you've got a few ideas now. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this useful, please consider subscribing. It makes a huge difference to smaller channels like mine, and there'll be more content very soon on how to upcycle furniture, decor and craft projects. Until next time, thanks so much. Bye!